On today's episode of Speak Shame with Dr. Connie Kerali.
We would find that the mixed race adults that would attend our events had a very powerful experience. A lot of those adults would say, I never got a chance to process my identity with my parents. I was like, I really need to help parents see what a gap they are creating when they don't talk about racial identity, when they don't talk about their kids' mixed race identity.
Hello, remarkable woman. I'm your host, Dr. Connie Kerali, medical doctor, life coach, and survivor of sexual violence. And you're listening to Speak Shame, a collection of inspiring conversations with remarkable women who have faced and overcome adversity. By sharing their stories, my hope is that you may find strength, connection, and hope in your own journey, and that shame itself loses its power. So sit back, relax, and don't forget to follow the show. Joining me on this week's episode of Speak Shame is the remarkable Jennifer Noble, or Dr. Jenn. Dr. Jenn is a licensed psychologist and parent coach specialising in children, teens, identity development, the mixed race population, and other marginalised groups. Dr. Jenn is the founder and CEO of Free to Be Collective, an organisation dedicated to helping marginalised folks and non-traditional families liberate themselves from societal rules and expectations. She works with interracial couples raising mixed-race children to help them learn to affirm and understand the mixed-race experience, with the ultimate goal of helping parents build in their children a secure mixed-race identity. The Free to Be Collective has an online coaching community for parents, in-person events centering the mixed-race experience, and other projects supporting families raising mixed-race children. Dr. Jenn also runs a private psychotherapy practice in Los Angeles and taught various psychology courses as a tenured associate professor of psychology for over 15 years. Dr. Jenn has been advocating for the mixed-race community for over 25 years. She conducts seminars for educators and clinicians seeking to increase their cultural humility when working with mixed-race populations, and has spoken at many conferences on adolescent development and topics central to the mixed-race experience. So thank you so much, Dr. Jenn, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And let's kick things off by finding out more about you. And
Okay.
question I like to ask my guests to start with is that if your life story was turned into a book, describe for me what would happen in chapter 1.
Well, yes. What would happen in chapter 1 is we would, I guess, learn about a lovely birth in the beachside town of Santa Monica, California. But I think some of the major pieces of that first chapter, depending on how far we go into my early life, would include a lot of diversity all around, and a lot of international travel at a very young age. And the reason I say that's going to be a big piece is because I do have family all around the world. And also in the place that I grew up, we grew up around a lot of different groups. And so therefore, I think it set the stage for me of really considering a lot of different people's backgrounds and culture specifically. I think I became fascinated very early on with minor things that were actually big markers in culture. So, for example, my cousins and I used to joke about, for example, I have cousins in the UK, and we would go to the grocery store and I'd say, oh, we have that cereal, but we call it this. And like, oh, what do you call it? And just like, I would notice like, oh, what is that word you're saying? And why do you say that letter that way? And so I think that would be a key factor in the early sort of chapter of like really setting the stage of like, the world is a humongous place with like a lot of different people, none better or worse, just like, wow, this is cool.
I like that introduction to your life and this vision of all these different cultures coming together and that excitement and seeing the world as a big place. And I wonder then if you could describe the journey from your childhood, growing up in California, to the work that you're doing today, to the amazing work you're doing today?
Yeah, I think, living here in California, well, I guess I should also let the listeners know I am mixed race myself. I am African American and Sri Lankan Tamil. And if you look at me, though, at least in the US, I am read as a Black woman only. So people don't necessarily see or recognize that I have a Sri Lankan background as well. And so this is not something I knew or understood until I encountered others in the real world. And so it was part of the journey of being like, oh, okay, I see how I'm seen. I see how people understand me. That is going to color how I interact and with others, and also understand myself. Um, and that kind of was the beginning of this journey of like, there is there are multiple perceptions that happen at one time. People see me a certain way. I see myself a certain way. My family sees me a certain way, so on and so forth. And I kind of started taking all of this into account. And so it was always that plus the travel and the culture and the interest in people, I think led me to psychology. I've always loved children, so something about that led me to teens. And so then I realized at some point I wanted to be a psychologist and I wanted to essentially focus on different cultural groups. So that's what I did in graduate school. And somewhere in undergrad, I also started researching about the mixed race community. And I was really surprised to find research on a population of people that I thought maybe I was one of the only ones, or, you just feel like, well, I don't really see a lot of people around like me. And I said, what? There are whole research studies on people like me. So that really began a passion and an interest. And so there were sort of two paths in the sense of I started doing volunteer work with a local organization that serves multiracial people and transracial adoptees. And then I was going on my path to become a clinical psychologist. And so these were always things that I kept separate, my passion, volunteer work, and then my clinical kind of career. And then sort of over the years down the line, I started to realize, oh, there is a clinical need for the needs of the mixed race population. So instead of just volunteering with them and maybe doing social events, I should be providing some of the education and the clinical expertise I have to them. And so that's when I kind of created the coaching program for parents of mixed race adults and kind of tailored my private practice to highlight the mixed race experience. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of how I got to doing this work. I finally realized there's a gap and I could feel it a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. And I
Yeah.
think it's great to get that context to understand how it all began and what's led you here today. And I'd like to go back to the point that you made about the discovery of the need that was there. And I wonder if you could maybe explain in more detail what things were becoming, making you aware of that need, I guess.
Yeah. So in this nonprofit organization, it's called Multiracial Americans of Southern California. We would hold a lot of events, and we would find that the mixed race adults that would attend our events always they just had a very powerful experience to sort of be in a room with 15 or 30 other mixed race people. You would think it's a small group, but they would say, I've never been in a space like this. I've never talked about this topic. I've never felt even safe enough to bring up my experiences. Oftentimes people would have tears. It was almost a joke to be like, okay, is someone going to cry this time? Because they're always like, I can't believe this exists. But one of the things, or the things that would come up a lot, is really a deep search for belonging and maybe sometimes difficulty finding it in a way that felt really firm. But for me, what stood out as well is that a lot of those adults would say, not only have I never been in a space like this, I never got a chance to process my identity with my parents. They never told me this, or they never taught me that. They never exposed me to 1, 2, and 3. And so they really felt at a loss when the world was expecting them to identify either with one particular group or know more about their background. And they would internalize that and say, well, something's wrong with me. I can't even, I don't know how to do whatever the society is expecting of me. I don't know which group to choose because I don't have any information. I wasn't prepared for all of these like bombardment of expectations. And so it was a space where they didn't have to answer the expectations. But what I left with is, why why did they do that to you? You know, in a very like, why did your parents like leave you out like that? Oh my gosh, they never talked about it. You never had a safe space even when your family. And so little by little I was like, I really need to help parents see what a gap they are creating when they don't talk about racial identity, when they don't talk about their kids mixed race identity, when they don't just even open the door of like, hey, we see it too, and if you want to talk about it, we're here to support you because we understand you're going to have some difficulty navigating your identity. So I wanted to kind of, as much as I could, help them realize you need to do this. It makes a difference.
Yeah, brilliant. And thank you for your work. And I imagine there'll be people who are listening to this episode, maybe who are parents of
Yeah,
mixed race children,
yeah,
who this maybe hasn't actually been something that has come to their mind, or maybe they've thought about it, but not really known how to approach it. So, and I
yeah.
wonder if you could give us a bit of a flavor of the sort of things that you talk about with the parents that you coach and work with.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is setting the groundwork for understanding maybe one large principle, which is that their child is not just one thing, not just two things, but three things. So, for example, if there is, let's say they are a child that has a South Asian parent and a white parent, just as an example. This is a child that is actually South Asian, white, but the third thing is that they are South Asian and white at the same time. And that's a new, like, that's a very new concept for a parent to kind of try to digest. But, and the reason I say it that way is because there is this third aspect of their child's identity that the parent has never had to navigate. They have never had to navigate, okay, what does it mean to be part of two groups at once? And if we take it from society's perspective, sometimes the society will say, you are less than a member because you're sort of split between two groups, which is incorrect. But helping a parent realize, no, 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 we don't split your children into halves. We are adding a third experience. And you need to know the nuances of this particular experience. Maybe you're very familiar with the South Asian experience, maybe very, very familiar with your white background or whatever European countries that they're from. But this third thing, you got to make space to know what it's going to be like for your kid and help them address it. So that's really like a big groundwork of so much work, like you said, that would take like a long time to pull out, but that's kind of where we start. I got to get the parent to be like, there's this third thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, well said. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I wonder then, when you've been doing the work that you do,
Yeah.
I wonder if it's brought up anything for you during this journey.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I think it's every mixed race person definitely has a very unique experience. For me, what I think it's brought up, let me go back a second because I think it actually influenced my dissertation really because once I started learning some of this, I really felt, you know what, cultural exposure has such an impact and it's underestimated. And I felt it so strongly because that's what I started to notice was a big difference. Whereas I had a lot of cultural exposure. I was, you know, consistently in Sri Lankan circles with my family, consistently connected to the Black community, and just really like entrenched in both and feeling very connected and like familiar with like nuances and foods and jokes and whatever. I would meet a lot of mixed race folks that just did not have that exposure or that experience or that knowledge, and that influenced their ability to form an identity, their ability to claim belonging, their ability to feel connected. And so it in a way, it brought up for me like, oh, this is not the norm. My experience is not the norm. Um, and that I can see how much has benefited me. So then it does influence my work of being like, let us find all the intentional ways that you can expose your kid. Because a lot of parents are like, well, my kid does have, a Ghanaian parent, but we don't live in Ghana and I don't have a Ghanaian friends and maybe I don't know where the Ghanaian community is. So, it's like, well, I try to show them some, artwork and maybe I show them a book and I say, no, you got to get more intentional. Where is the Ghanaian community? Where is just a restaurant? And if you don't have specific Ghana, then we're going to go West Africa. Then we're going to go larger African continent. We're going to like, is there even a family I work with in Canada, actually, there was I forget what they called it, but it was essentially like a Pan-African outdoor festival. And I was like, we're going to that. We are figuring out how to go to that because the closest we can get to your kid being around, like, wait, I'm connected to this. I'm connected to these people. We need that. So we need to get parents intentional, putting themselves a little bit in an uncomfortable zone to be like, well, but what if I'm not African? Guess what? You're going to be uncomfortable for a second so that your kid can have some exposure and some contact. So, I think that's what it showed me. I was like, whoa, that is a big missing piece for a lot of kids.
Yeah, I love that. And I saw one of your posts as well where you wrote about how seeing, I think, Sade perform and
Yeah.
how seeing someone who was just, in their element.
Yeah.
I think they were barefoot on stage. If you could kind of describe this post maybe for
Oh,
your
yes.
for the listeners,
Oh,
I don't know
my.
if you know which one I'm referring to.
Oh, I
Yeah.
definitely know because I love Sade. You don't even have to read whatever I wrote. It's in here. I honestly used to watch that concert over. I mean, these are the days of when you could record the television. So it wasn't a concert that they showed. But yeah, I remember for whatever reason, I must have seen some, maybe in that same program or another news story, it became clear that Sade was talking about her own background. I had already known her music. I was relatively young. I think I was like, yeah, I was relatively young. So I knew her music, but this particular program introduced me to the fact that she was British and Nigerian, and she was talking so openly about it. And she said her whole name, and I was like, that's her name? Whoa, like, because it's just like, you think Sade, oh yeah, singer's name. But I was like, holy Sade, like, that sounds really like she's connected. She knows her, she said what it meant. But I remember it standing out. I'm like, oh, she is British and Nigerian, and she really didn't erase either one of them. She said it with such pride and like such connection of like, this is just what it is. I'm not going to choose one or the other, but I am deeply connected to this and I'm deeply connected to that. And there was just such like, to me, a freedom, like seeing her on stage, just sort of being herself. Like you never really saw a lot of singers like this. Like I said, she had this really cute outfit. To me, looked a little bit like a sari because it looked like a sari blouse and the skirt. But she had her shoes off and she was doing these kind of different dances that I hadn't seen. And I was like, she's amazing. She's my idol. Oh my gosh. Like how can I
I
be
was
like
like,
whatever?
Shad.
Yeah. Whatever she has inside, I think that's what it was. It was like something inside of her was not choreographed or it wasn't like given to her. It wasn't a persona. It wasn't a performance. It was just really her being her like true self and it coming out. And I was like, ooh, I want to be able to access that in myself.
Yes, no,
Yeah.
I love that post. I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I obviously we've talked about the work that you do with parents, and I want to kind of switch the focus onto the children.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
mixed race children. I think you work as well with
Yeah.
adolescents, is that right?
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
I wonder what your advice would be for mixed race adolescents who maybe their parents haven't been as engaged, maybe they've grown up in foster care or have been adopted and maybe don't feel the connection. Um,
Yeah.
what work do you do with them if you can give us an overview?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you even gave some examples of like differing levels of connection because a child that was adopted into a family that has neither of their like a mixed race child that's adopted by two parents that do not have either of their backgrounds, that's a much bigger jump versus a mixed race kid who may know their background, but they are in and out of foster care versus the kid that lives with one or both of their parents, but still struggles to connect and feel belonging. So the same idea is true for all three, but it's the first one I try to help teens understand is that they have the right to do so, to connect. When I say the right, um, they have the right to connect to community. And that's an easy thing to say, but it's a hard thing to internalize sometimes for these teens because they are feeling the shame of, but I don't know enough, and I didn't grow up eating these foods or speaking this language, and so therefore I cannot claim. And I say, no, that is just not true. By birth, you already can. Now the rest of it is learning. The rest of it is you. Maybe you didn't learn it when you were 3, but you can learn it when you're 14. It's okay. It's just 11 years later. And so kind of removing the shame of like, somehow I didn't grow up right. I didn't grow up with the right exposure and the right teaching. And so somehow now I've lost the chance or the permission to be a part of this group. That's a big thing. And then another big thing for teens, especially, is appearance. Um, and I perhaps even have to put that higher because a lot of times teens are very concerned about how they appear to others, all teens, but then a mixed race teen, especially, they walk out into the world and they say, well, everybody thinks I'm this, or maybe they don't see this. And how do I navigate the way I look versus, against my identity? Especially the teen that hasn't maybe had the exposure. For example, I was just reading about it, a young man, I think he's an author, and he's also living in the UK, but he has a Trinidadian father and I think a white British mother. Um, and because he looks to everyone very like a person of African descent, like when he walks down the street, but he did not grow up around his Trinidadian family. He did not grow up with Trinidadian culture. So it was always a big affront for people to see him and say, oh, you know about this, and what about that? And oh, surely you've had this food. And he just felt like every day it's a reminder of what I should have known or who I should be. And, what does that mean for the way I understand myself? Am I doing it wrong? All of those things are really important to teens.
Imagine, and I think it's so useful as well for all of us to get an understanding
Yeah.
of, you know, be mindful of the things that we say as
Right.
well, to mixed race children, mixed race adults as well, not to be making
Yeah.
assumptions.
Yeah.
And I guess that kind of leads me on to what you hope listeners would take away. So, maybe they're not the parent of a mixed race child, maybe they're not mixed race themselves. What would you
Yeah.
want them to take away from this episode?
Yeah, I think a great takeaway for someone who does not live this experience is one, to maybe this episode kind of opens their eyes a little bit like, oh, I really have not spent a lot of time thinking about this group, maybe other than the common stereotypes of like, oh, they're just also exotic. And it's a very, objectifying kind of view. But if I would hope they would sit back and say, oh, you know what? I never thought about what daily life might be like for them. But secondly, to me, I think a big takeaway is that everyone is a member of more than one group at the same time or has more than one identity at the same time. So a common example I give is like, let's say you're a sister or you have a sister, that means you are also a daughter. And you are both at the same time. You never have to choose. Okay, but like, which one are you really? Are you a daughter or are you, a sister? They're going to say, I'm clearly both. And sometimes when you're with your mother, you're going to behave more like a daughter. And sometimes when you're with your sister, you're going to behave more like a sister. Because there's things you're going to say to your sister that you're probably never going to say to your mother, because you've learned, okay, this is how we interact here. This is how we interact here. But that experience of having multiple identities at one time is not a foreign thing for someone to understand. Because, like I said, the daughter sister example is a really easy starting point for them to be like, oh, I never thought about it that way, that they really are separate and they are very different, but they're within me at the same time. And I never have to separate them. I never have to choose. So why do we do that with race and culture and ethnicity? You know?
Absolutely. And I love everything you're saying. And I'm sure there are going to be people who are listening who are like, can I work with Dr. Jenn? If people want to find you, I know you've got a great Instagram presence, and obviously you do work with parents and adolescents. How do people find you? How do they connect with you?
Yeah, I think that is a great starting point, is the Instagram, which is at Dr. Jenn Psych. That's DrJennPSYCH, so two N's. And that's, for you, like you said, that's kind of the nice intro, lots of little snippets that you can binge if you like. But otherwise, it would just be my website, which is the freetobecollective.com. Right now, I'm making some updates. So I think if they go at this very moment, or whenever hopefully when this airs, it will be revamped and they'll be able to find all the things that I have, which is like, I have a journal for parents raising mixed race kids. It's a 30-day journal to just help them start, like I said, laying that groundwork of like, what is my child's experience going to be? That journal's on Amazon. I have ways that they can work with me directly, whether it just be like a one-on-one coaching session or my online parenting community. So they'll be able to find all of that on my website. So yeah.
Brilliant. I will make sure that's all in the show notes,
Oh,
definitely.
thank you.
And I wanted to ask as well, as we've sort of draw to a close, is there anything that you feel like, actually, I really wanted to talk about this? This is really important, and I think people need to hear about this. Please go ahead.
Well, gosh, now you're making me choose. I can never choose one topic when it comes to Yeah, no, I think there's nothing I wish to talk about that I haven't. But I just do think in general, especially given the topic and theme of your podcast, I do think recognizing shame amongst mixed race folks is important for everybody to consider, because it comes from a societal structure that we have, essentially, that expects every person to fit in to one racial ethnic group nice and neatly within one little box. Like we work under that, and we don't realize how deeply ingrained this belief is of like, yeah, but like, what's your one box? Like, of course you fit in one box. And so to me, I guess that's the thing I always want to talk about, is challenging. Hey, do you know that we do this to people? And if so, what's happening is, when we don't realize that society is doing it to people, the person who it's being done to starts to feel the shame of like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. I should have one box. Well, which box will I pick? Oh no, well, that doesn't feel good. And well, maybe it should feel good. Maybe I just don't. Maybe I'm confused because I can't seem to choose. No, it's the fact that you were being forced into this either or choice. So I think that's always worth everybody considering, like, wait, oh shoot, we created like a unsolvable problem for a certain group of people because they're never going to be able to choose one group. I'm always going to be able to check off Black and Asian, right? Or South Asian, depending on what country you have, they name the boxes differently. But there is no correct answer except for the two boxes, So that's the mindset I always think about.
Thank you for that. And I always end the podcast by asking my guests if they could name one remarkable woman who has inspired them. Who would it be and why?
My gosh. This one I should have thought about ahead of time. Okay, I'm just going to say, only because I had a conversation about it yesterday, there is a Kenyan woman named Wangari Maathai. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. To me, she is an amazing woman. She has an autobiography that I read, and it just blew me away. She's won Nobel Prize for her work in environment and like kind of trying to rebuild the forest that people have cut down. So the reason why is because she lived in a very traditional, gender traditional Kenyan society. And at like every level, she was like, forget that, I'm doing it this way. And they're like, what? You can't do that. And she's like, watch, I'm going to do this. And at like every level, she was like, they said I can't, but I decided we need more trees. So I'm going to figure out how to plant them everywhere with local people helping me, and they're going to volunteer. I mean, it's just amazing, every level of work she's done. So that's my woman. That's my person that inspires me, Wangari Maathai.
Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
honestly, thank you for taking the time, for being with me today, for sharing your experience and also your knowledge and the work that you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Speak Shame with Dr. Connie Kerali, and thank you so much to Dr. Jenn for being my guest on this week's show. Please take a look at the show notes for information on Dr. Jenn's social media handles so that you can connect with her. If you'd like to join the community, head over to @Dr. Connie Kerali on Instagram. If you're a remarkable woman who's been silenced by shame and you're ready to reclaim your voice, then join me at my next free Shame Resilience workshop. You'll find the booking link in the show notes. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to get a new episode every other Thursday. Until next time, take care.